if you look on your program, if you flip to the second page, there's a chart there. It was up on the screen before, and it's divided left and right. And there's a list on the left that says, it's small print, so hopefully you can see it. It is a traditional pyramid of how we think of power structures, hierarchies. And on the right, that's been flipped on its head. So look at number 9, if you can see, on the left, on the traditional hierarchy, the traditional pyramid. So it occurred to me that in a servant leadership conference or talk, there's a built-in joke here, where there was a servant leadership conference and no one got up to speak. That's the best I'm going to do for a joke. So I'm arguably least qualified to speak about empathy, partially due to my relative youth to some of the people in the room, and that is a comment of respect. I just turned 40, but I've managed to cram a lot into 40 years, and I'm still on that spectrum of empathy, and I'll tell you what the spectrum looks like. I didn't bring visuals, so use your head or draw it. If you think of a spectrum, on the far left would be what I would call an apathetic person. Now, we toss the term apathy around, I think, casually, too casually. An apathetic person, if you really look at that word, is someone who has no emotions, someone who has no passion, no feeling for others at all. That's very hard to do as a human, but there are people who approach that, and they're cruel, they're cold-hearted. Next to that person, moving to the right, is someone who is capable of pity. Now, I think an apathetic person, the best we can hope for from that person is pity. So think of a cruel leader. Think of begging for mercy from a cruel leader or your boss. If that person is apathetic, the best you can hope for is pity. That maybe they'll let you live, maybe they'll let you continue to work. After pity, again moving to the right, you have sympathy. Now, sympathy is something I think we're all very familiar with as a term, as a concept. That's the idea that I don't have your personal experience, but I have something like it. I'm not sick right now, you're sick. I've been sick before, so I know what you're going through, and I can sympathize. I have a 7-year-old daughter, so we talk a lot about the differences between sympathy and empathy. Empathy is tough, and it's tough to talk about empathy because in our nomenclature, it's a very new word. The word itself was borrowed from the German. Any German speakers in the room? Okay. The German word was einfühlen. I had to dust off my college German to get that one out. It means in feeling, and it came out of the German Romantic period in the 18th century, essentially. And it was this way to talk about aesthetics, right? When you're looking at a painting, when you're listening to a piece of music, what's a good word to describe that feeling? Well, they came up with empathy or in feeling. In English, we borrowed it, and it's a neologism from the Greek, and it means in passion, in feeling. But it's a new word, and if you look at the literature about empathy, and there's been an explosion of literature about empathy in the last decade, I would say, it's very ill-defined. I think there are a lot of cultural reasons why it's ill-defined, and there are some practical reasons why it's ill-defined. But I'd like to suggest that if you look at the spectrum of apathy, pity, sympathy, empathy, you start to understand that the challenge with empathy as a practice and as an idea is because while I firmly believe the human heart is built for empathy, there are so many things that surround us that have a contrary message to that. It's okay to be sympathetic. because in that traditional power structure, as a leader or as a follower, it's okay. You can still be that strong, like, top-down, traditional management style and be sympathetic. And you're not going to get any cultural pushback from that. In fact, someone might say, well, he or she's a good boss. They were sympathetic. Empathetic is a lot harder because it does flip that traditional model upside down. It asks you, as an individual, to be another person. Someone mentioned walking a mile in another's shoes. I think that's a good start. But really what empathy asks you to do is to strip everything else away that is separating you from that other person. Get down to your most basic human level with that person and deeply understand them. And that is not easy. And it's not easy, or it's tough, because it requires three things. First of all, it requires you to cross over. So the idea of empathy is akin to the idea of a metaphor. So bear with me here, I'm a recovering English major. In poetry, in language, when we talk of metaphor, it's different than a simile. So if you recall from English, a simile is when you compare two things with a like. Life is like A. How many of you just thought box of chocolates when I said that? Okay. That's a simile. A metaphor is radically different. It asks you to cross over from one idea to the other and blend them such that they're almost inseparable. Empathy is the same way. Think of sympathy, I'm using a simile here. Sympathy is like a simile, whereas empathy is a metaphor, okay? So empathy is tough because it asks you not to compare yourself to another person, not to compare something you've gone through with something they've gone through. That's a good starting point. Empathy asks you in a very profound way to be that person, if only for a moment. That's tough to do. There are a lot of things that will separate you, cultural things, historical things, social things, the barrage of negative messages that hit us every day from a culture that says empathy is not only not desirable, it's not possible. There are a lot of things that get in between you and being empathetic, and me. The second thing that empathy requires is sacrifice. It does require that you sit down, like Mark talked about, if you're an employer or you're in a position of leadership, to sit down with that person one-on-one, sacrifice your time, your energy to be with that person and to really understand them. That also is very tough to do. It's far easier to just go through the motions every day with your coworkers, with your employees, with your boss. I shouldn't use the word boss. It's actually, the etymology of the word boss is disturbing. So I apologize, I'll try not to use it. It's built into our language though, right? It's built into that traditional power structure. The third thing that is required is ritual. You have to practice empathy much like you exercise. I too come from a background in the construction industry. I'm used to getting up very, very early. 4 in the morning is when my eyes open. I get up in the morning and I exercise not because I find it enjoyable to get up at 4 in the morning and run in the dark, but because I know if I don't, it's not going to happen at any other point in the day, and I'm not going to be able to function as well as I would like to function. I'm not going to be able to serve others. I'm not going to be able to do the things that are required of me if I don't get up and do that. And over time it gets easier. It gets a little easier to get up at 4, it's a little easier to go running, you push yourself. But it's constant, because if you sleep in for a day or 2 or a week, it gets harder and harder. Your muscles weaken. Empathy is the same way. You have to get up daily and practice it. It's tough. So, It requires you to cross over. It requires you to sacrifice, and it requires daily practice. Why is it important? If we look at the word empathy and we try to trace the roots of the concept, if not the word, it's a profound concept that stretches back through at least written history. You're not going to find the word empathy in Aristotle or Aeschylus or Cicero or the classics, but you'll find the idea, because it's a profound idea that raises its head time and time again. The stories that we gravitate toward naturally, I believe, are ones that at their heart are empathetic stories. The people that we gravitate toward naturally are empathetic people. It is very, very rare to find people who will willingly follow an apathetic leader. Look at history. Look at all the dictators throughout history that have used power and might and that traditional structure to bend the wills of others to do what they want done. Evil things. People don't willingly follow, most people don't willingly follow dictators. People will follow a sympathetic leader to a point. People will die for, will sacrifice for empathetic people. All our stories, the ones that persist over time, embody empathy. Now, to me, that tells me something. Look at all the movies that are produced. Look at even popular songs. Listen to the messages. The ones that will resonate with you, that you'll tell your children or your grandchildren, I guarantee you, have more to do with empathy than anything else. Those are the stories that persist. They get retold in different ways. But there are some profound truths in those stories that are timeless, that are universal. So, again, I think we're designed to follow empathetic people. Our hearts are designed for empathy. But it takes this daily practice. It takes sacrifice. And it takes profound understanding of other people. Our culture does suffer from a lack of practice empathy. If you listen to the radio, do people listen to the radio? I listen to the radio. If you watch television, if you engage with social media, look at the messages that are sent. Just calculate them. There's been some profound social critics. One of my favorite is a Catholic social critic, John Kavanaugh, he wrote a really great book called Following Christ in a Consumer Society. I would encourage you to read it even if you're not a practicing Christian, because it talks a lot about what the diet that we feed ourselves of media and the stories that we feed ourselves, intentionally or not. And the amount of advertising that a child is exposed to by the time they're 18 is astronomical. And the majority of the messages in that advertising, and if you're in advertising, this is not a condemnation of your industry. If you're in business and you use advertising, this is not a condemnation of your practices within your industry. Advertising, marketing, that's a tool. It's a way to deliver messages. So look at the messages behind it. It is frightening when you think of the messages that are counter to this idea of empathy or servant leadership. It's everywhere, it's ubiquitous. So our culture as a whole does not practice empathy at the level it needs to. We're asked to do things that, again, I think are contrary to our natural empathetic heart. So we're asked to buy the latest gadget instead of, fill in the blank, instead of sponsoring a child who's in poverty. We're asked not to care about war or the exploitation of the weak or a myriad of social and spiritual ills. We're asked not to care about those. We're asked instead to fill in the blank. Because it's far easier to numb yourself, to turn that off. And believe me, I struggle with this as well. So, although we are designed for empathy, our culture sends us a lot of messages that are contrary to that. So I'm going to switch now to some questions, because I think hopefully we can prompt some discussion.
We're going to do the questions at the end.
All right, I'm not going to switch to questions.
Personal examples.
Okay, perfect.
That would be helpful.
Right, okay, personal examples. So, I'm the executive director of a business improvement district in Milwaukee. It's the historic King Drive Business Improvement District, or just King Drive, that's easier. I came into this role 2 years ago and knew it was going to be a very challenging role. A business improvement district is essentially a quasi-public, we're nonprofit, but we're quasi-public. We're like a subunit of government. My district extends from the north at Locust and King Drive, or 3rd, down to McKinley. So it's 2 miles. And that represents arguably the most interesting cross-section of Milwaukee that you could find. There's a ton of history there, good and bad. Last year we celebrated, or we at least recognized the 45th anniversary of the race riots in Milwaukee, which the epicenter of which were in my drive. There's a lot of cultural history there as well. Some of it has been undone, and some of it is starting to come back. So when I took the job, I came right out and asked, and I said, this is predominantly an African American community. What are they going to think of a white guy coming in from, and I live in Fox Point. What are they going to think of me coming in? And I need to know this. And my board represents the whole spectrum of the district. So I assumed I was getting an honest answer from them, and I think I was by and large. And they said, it's not going to make a difference. It really isn't. Some people might have a problem with it, but by and large, people here just want work to get done, and they don't care who's doing the work. And by and large, I found that to be the case. However, this is an ongoing lesson for me in empathy and an opportunity for me to practice it because of the issues that Milwaukee faces as a whole, as the most racially segregated city in the United States. If you didn't know that, it's quite true. We're also the 4th poorest. In my district, represents a stark division between those two worlds that Milwaukee represents. You can cross North Avenue going north in my district, and you see a radical change. So, empathy in my line of work means understanding why things are the way they are with the businesses, the community, the residents in my area, and reaching a place of profound understanding about the barriers that exist in my district and in Milwaukee as a whole. I'll give you a couple really quick examples of how this plays out in the real world in my life. Yesterday, unannounced, a woman walks into my office, and this happens quite a bit. And she represented a church from in the heart of the inner city, way outside of my district. And she was looking for money to build out, to finish building out their church. And she saw that we were a nonprofit and that we were engaged in the community and thought perhaps we had money for them. Well, we don't. There are structural limitations of what I do and my organization can do that prohibit us from directly underwriting such things. I had a choice at that point. It could have been a very polite, I'm sorry, I can't help you out, best of luck. But I had to force myself because it's practice, it's exercise. There's got to be a way I can help this woman. There's got to be a way my organization can help her achieve what she's trying to achieve. And so we ended up sitting down and talking for quite a long time. And she left with a number of resources. I still felt like I hadn't done everything I could do. But on that spectrum from apathy to empathy, I would like to think that perhaps I was closer to being empathetic than I was even to sympathetic or, God forbid, apathetic. I get calls from businesses all the time looking for similar, support. What I have found in our community is people are, when you get down to it, are far less interested in your direct financial support. That's part of it, but they're far more interested in understanding you, your organization, and how all of us can work together to improve our area. Again, this is arguably one of the most challenging parts of Milwaukee for a number of reasons. What I came here today to learn and be edified with is how all of you deal with similar situations. How do you exercise empathy that will help me better serve those in my community, better serve those for whom I am charged with assisting in any way I can. Part of that work, as Dave referenced, is with MSOE and with Sarah, who will be speaking after me. How do we leverage the resources both in the district and in the Milwaukee community and with leaders such as yourselves, such that we can empower others to be empathetic and to grow and to reach that point of freedom where they can in turn turn around and help others. This is a profound thing, and it takes an awful lot of energy, it takes a lot of sacrifice. It certainly takes you, me, all of us reaching this point where we're willing to cross over, and it's a lifetime thing. It's a daily exercise, it's a routine. So that's all I have. I'd actually love to speak with you one-on-one, so I can learn from you as well. So thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of what we're up to.